My guest today is the cover artist for nearly every single Goosebumps book ever released. What an honor to have him here on the show today. The legend, my friend, Tim Jacobus. How are you doing today, Tim?
How's it going?
First off, I'm a Goosebumps kid. In 1992, when they came out, that was my jam. My library I had at my elementary was always bringing in all kinds of new books. Man, the Welcome to Dead House cover that you did, it like drew me in. The lettering, it's like this embossed. It's almost like braille. Like everything about the book was like captivated me, and I became a fan then on. And your artwork, you are like my Picasso. That's how impactful your work has been in my life. Let's dive into some of your early beginnings in art and how you got into art, your like early influences and so on and so forth.
I started drawing as a kid just for the sake of fun. Um, my dad could draw, so drawing was something that we did at the house that was just a normal activity. Mostly we used it as a utility. So if you were trying to describe something or you're trying to make a point, if you could draw something on the side to hammer home your ideas, we all did it. Uh, I never thought of art as a career. My father knew nothing about it. He grew up relatively poor, and he worked as a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And the idea that art or anything like that, art was something you did for fun, but that's not what you did for work. So I never approached it in that manner. It was just something that you did either strictly just because it was fun, or again, just to again, never thinking seriously about it for career stuff. I had a buddy who lived next door to me who was the same age, and he liked to draw as well. And we drew as part of the other stuff that you do every day, along with riding bikes and playing sports and swimming at the lake. Every once in a while we would just sit down and start to draw. The funny thing is we were doing that when we were 8, 9, 10 years old, and we ended up going to art school together. He continued his career. He's a very successful commercial director, writer, and director, creator, and I went my path. So, both of us not thinking of art as anything ended up, finding art. Actually, we were probably a little bit older before it kind of hit us where it was like, oh, wait a minute. We don't have to, we maybe can make a run at this thing. So, yeah, that was kind of the early starts.
Were there some covers growing up that influenced you that you saw on books? What was like some of the artists from you growing up that you saw and you're like, wow, like, that really influenced you in a sense, you know?
The real impact came once I got to high school, and that's when uh, music became a very important part of my life and all my friends' lives. We all had the nice stereos with the big giant speakers, and I spent more on my first stereo than I did on my first car. And all the music back then was vinyl, and albums were, that was at the real gallery of the time. So I discovered the artists that influenced me the most actually through music and through album covers. The guy who 100% had the biggest impact on me was a guy named Roger Dean. Roger Dean is an illustrator that did all the covers for the album Yes, and he also did other people's album covers, but that's where that was the real claim to fame. And I was just, from the moment I saw his art, I was so totally hooked. And yeah, a major influence.
You know what's so cool about that is it's the vinyl's back. It's like the resurgence of vinyl. Isn't that incredible?
It's crazy. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Yeah, for so you know, always wanted to do a lot of album covers. Never did a lot early on in my illustration career. Did a couple, but nothing of noteworthiness. And now, all these years later, I'm doing more album covers now than I am um, uh, book covers. So yeah, the return of vinyl has been great, and all the Pro Tools and how self-publishing in the writing business and also in the music business has let people get stuff farther down the road by themselves. They don't need the big publisher and recording companies and everything else. You can put together a decent product by yourself. So those people, that gives those people an avenue to be creative, and then I get to join into that creativity.
As a youngster, like, growing up in your teen years and all of that, were you into, horror movies or anything spooky or anything like that? Was that always a thing in your past growing up as well?
I was not the horror guy. So it's kind of ironic that I ended up being this specialized horror illustrator for kids. Um, my running joke is if I was 11 years old or 10 when Goosebumps came out, I probably would have been too scared to read them. So I would have been my own worst fan. Um, but I always was drawn to the fantasy side of art. I wasn't a realist or a wildlife artist or anything like that. I was always leaning towards the fantastic stuff that you couldn't see, stuff that spurred imaginations. I had friends who were good photographers, and it's like, well, you guys have the real world covered. I gotta come up with something else that's going to draw you in and get your attention. So that was an angle I took way early on when I started to get my illustrations and my paintings underway.
Goosebumps. Nearly 100 covers, right? I mean, you've done like 300 plus covers in general, but like nearly 100 Goosebumps covers already, right? That's kind of the number we're at.
A little bit more than that, but it doesn't make any it doesn't make any difference. A lot of them.
Let's talk about how that came about. How did you first get involved with Goosebumps, and then, yeah, become the definitive artist of, I mean, definitive artist of my generation, that's for sure. But like for Goosebumps, you are Goosebumps. Like as much as R.L. Stein's name is on the book, I mean, when I think Goosebumps, yes, like he wrote them, and I enjoyed reading them, but man, like the decision to pick certain books over others and what made me gravitate towards certain things, a lot of it was just based on the art. Because honestly, like, there's no picture for anyone who hasn't read a Goosebumps book, there's no images in the books, so you leave it to your imagination to create these stories, and I am going literally to what I see in the cover that you did. So that's kind of like how I embark on this reading journey. So the impact that you have with your art is great, Tim. So I would love to hear how you got involved and how that all came about, you know?
Yeah, I'll go back and talk about the how I actually got chosen to do it. But I think one of the key elements to having made an impact on guys like you or people of your age group is Scholastic Books had a great uh, inroads to all the schools, and they held those Scholastic book fairs. And Scholastic started out as a textbook publisher long before they started doing books for entertainment. So they were already in the schools just from doing math and history and geography books. So when they started to venture on into books for entertainment, the inroads were already there. In 1991, when we first started, actually 92, when we did our first Goosebumps cover, there wasn't a lot of stuff that was really challenging you guys. You know, that it was still a lot of the classics were there. You know, you got your Nancy Drew books and the Hardy Boys, and there was a couple of new things happening, but there was nothing outrageous. And we just, you know, dipped our toe into that horror stuff. And so my books were, again, in the middle of at your school library. They're in a sea of nothingness, so they really were going to stand out. So if you went to, you know, if your first exposure to Goosebumps was at maybe a Barnes and Noble, or, you know, a traditional bookstore, they wouldn't have stood out as much as they did in your school library. So yeah, that was so. I always felt like I kind of cheated my way in a little bit to get your guys' attention, because there wasn't a lot of stuff around my stuff that was getting your attention. So I could get you to pick that book up pretty easy. But going back to what you asked, I had been doing book covers for, I think I did my first cover in 1985. I kind of struggled along there at the beginning, and I'm throwing these dates out there, so these are just guesstimates. But somewhere around, you know, 1988, I probably did my first book cover for Scholastic. I had done a little bit of everything. Most of it was for the young adult market, which was mostly a girl-based genre, and again, it was always leaning towards the fantasy, you know, maybe a little science fiction-y. And I had done a number of one-offs, no series works, just single covers. And when Goosebumps came along, I wasn't busy, which was good for me at that moment. And I had already kind of proven myself to be a little bit responsible, or I'd proven myself to be responsible. So, you know, my work was consistent. I got it done on time. I was, you know, I was okay at taking criticism and making changes. So I just kind of happened to be standing in the right place at the right time when the Goosebumps series came along. And like you said at the beginning, Welcome to Dead House was the first one, and I read it. I thought it was cool, and I liked the way it was one of the few Goosebumps books that I got a bigger portion of the book. RL was always writing the book at the same time I was doing the cover, so I didn't get a lot of finished material to read. But Welcome to Dead House had a really nice, I had a solid full chapter, so I could get the idea of what he was doing and how his rhythm was to his art and to his writing. And yeah, I was excited right from the start.
Welcome to Dead House came out. I was 7 years old, so that was the first. Honestly, that was the first like scary or, you know, story I'd ever read in my life. That was that. So that's why I'll never forget it.
You were, yeah, you were prime time. I mean, you couldn't have been. You were the right age at the right time. So not only were you exposed to the books right at the beginning, you could look at them in succession. I mean, book one is your book one. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, you're literally talking to your demographic basically right now. I'm not kidding. Yeah, like I saw everything unravel. That's why it's such an impact for me. And you know what's wild is that, do you feel like that book was so much more darker, scarier, more serious than some of the other ones? Because they got a little like sillier as time went on. The stories like more lighthearted or funny in some things. But that first one, Welcome to Dead House, it always seemed like it was like, I remember reading, I was like, whoa, like it was so much like spookier, you know? There's something about the story in itself.
It's funny that you mentioned it and that you noticed. I've heard R.L. Stine talk about that because it was new and he had been used to writing for the older kids he was doing Fear Street at the time, and so he was used to writing to high school kids. He wasn't quite sure where to put the emphasis and how hard to go with the stories. And after he wrote the first one, again, these are his words, I'm just repeating the story. He felt that he had maybe pushed it a little bit too far. And on the subsequent books, he started to roll it back a little. And you're absolutely right. Humor is a big part of the Goosebumps series. And he always liked to use that as a diffuser, diffusing, a tense moment. He could put in something that was humorous. Sometimes the surprise ending in the story was humorous. And I always liked that, because then I knew with my artwork, it could be a little bit, I didn't have to worry about keeping that hard edge on the art. It could be a little bit silly as well.
I was like reading Goosebumps every chance I had to when I was at the library. Like you said, it would stand out because you look on the side and you see the little slime on the side, the word Goosebumps, and then the books, just the colors, the colors that you would all use were so cool, and it stood out from everything else that was on the shelf. And so I was in this whole place in my life, like as a kid, like that, like just reading Goosebump books, and then like Saturday nights, like on Nickelodeon, they would have this show called Are You Afraid of the Dark? And so I was like all into like all this like spooky stuff. Like it was like such a it became like kind of a trend at the time, like I don't really see that now as much, like, but there was this like pinnacle point in that time of my life where that was like a thing, and I just dug it so much, and that was like my intro to a lot of storytelling and that genre, and I just loved it. So it made a big impact.
You were in an ideal spot. Even the shows on Comedy Central for kids, all had a real edge to them. And you're right. There isn't as much of the scary stuff out there that there used to be. There's some, but I think the '90s were a big push because there hadn't been for a long time. And then it was funny. Early on, this is before Goosebumps, I had a rep who helped me get art, and we also tried to push some of our own stories and our own books. And before Goosebumps had come out, we had a book, a collection of stories called The Fairy Tales from Mythology, and they were dark fairy tales. They were stuff that was out in the public domain, and we were able to rewrite some of the stories. And so we did a mock front and back cover, a mock story, and we took it around to the publishers. And all of them were rejecting it based on the idea that, listen, kids, 8 through 11 aren't interested in scary stuff. This was something they had in their head. And all of them said the same thing. Yeah, there's no real market for this. The part that they did say was true is they're like, look, this would be more appealing to boys, but boys aren't reading yet. Like they won't pick up books until they're a little bit older. Goosebumps really picked up the boy market, and where I believe at the beginning the books were more geared towards girls because girls were the only ones reading books in that age group. And then you guys jumped right on board. And once we started seeing that, then RL just started to steer the stories your way.
I actually still have a sealed first edition. Do you remember when they used to have the Goosebumps in these box sets where they were 4 books in a sealed box set? I still have the first edition set with the Welcome to Dead House sealed in it. The one that has the price tag, it says $11.80. This is before they hiked the price up, before the popularity kicked in. So it's technically the first batch of the books released. And I kept that sealed. And I still have it to this day. Of course, I have an open Welcome to Dead House that I read. And that one's like torn. That one's seen some better days. But I have a sealed box set, which like I'm not opening. And like I know that thing's rare because like I've looked online and like I cannot even find the original first box set like that. But it's just so cool. There's just like so much nostalgia. Sometimes I think about like if you're even just to like crack it a little bit open, like the plastic, you'd smell like that that like 1992 like book smell, you know, like the it's like being in like the Scholastic Book Fair all over again. You know what I mean?
That's part of what's been cool lately is that particular you finding that book set and hanging on to it, and then now through social media being able to watch other Goosebumps fans out there with the stuff that they're finding that should be long gone, and because Goosebumps got printed on every crazy thing that there could be, and to see you guys, there isn't a week that goes by where I go, wow, I never saw that. I didn't even see that back in the day, let alone see it anytime recently. And it's cool. There's some wild collections going on out there.
So many covers that you did, Tim. Do you have a favorite?
It changes. There's ones that I know that people are drawn to. I know that because I sell some prints when I'm out at comic conventions, and I also sell prints through here. And there's three that outsell all the others hands down. It's not even close. It's those three, and then it drops off way down to the bottom very, very quickly. So it is The Haunted Mask, Night of the Living Dummy, and A Day at Horrorland. And I couldn't tell you which one is the reigning champ out of them, but they're, every once in a while I go, oh, it's definitely a Day at Horrorland. And then all of a sudden, Night of the Living Dummy will outsell it, for months on end. And so all I know is those three really stand out. Ones that I like, one of my favorites is one of the ones that was later in the series. You might have already been grown out of the series by then if you started at the age you did. But The Curse of Camp Coal Lake is one that I like a great deal. Yeah, it's the skull-headed woman coming out of the lake and the reflection in the water. That one just worked the way I had hoped it would work, and I like the simpleness of it. It's just you can't get away from the eyes.
Yeah, no, that I know what cover you're talking about. That's like very that cover. I look at it and I think it's like a George Romero film, like a horror film, like a zombie movie where she's coming out of the water, right? The skeleton. Yeah, that's a cool cover.
How about you? You got one?
The one with the scarecrow in the front has always resonated with me because that was a book that I just always happened to. I personally own that one. But Welcome to Dead House for me, since it was the start. There's like this nostalgia that I have tied to Welcome to Dead House. Like as like a little kid, I would like let my cousins or people around me like analyze the cover and be like, do you see anything on there? And like what I was kind of alerting to is like, do they see the little character in the right? And like people wouldn't catch it. No, I just see the house. I was like, you don't see? Like, like I would be like, do it like as a kid, like on purpose. Like I'd try to like see, do they catch it? It's almost like Where's Waldo for me. You know what I mean? And it's like they don't see the monster in the window. So that was like a thing for me. So for me, like the nostalgia, Welcome to Dead House is like the book, but I love so many of the covers. It Came from Beneath the Sink was always really cool to me. Something about like the eyes. I always thought that one was so cool because you don't know what the creature looks like, and I kind of went off on the eyes, and so it kind of made my imagination go off.
Yeah, that one threw me for a loop because I was going, come on, really? It's a sponge beneath the sink, and I'm like, I don't know how to make this scary, and yeah, it just once we started going down the road, it was like, all right, this is gonna work. Yeah, again, the thing that always worked well with the Goosebumps stuff was when the creature was in a familiar or a common setting. Monster Blood 2 had Cuddles the hamster in school, but obviously the hamster was demented. And How I Got My Shrunken Head is in a typical kid's bedroom, but there's the shrunken head on the table. So, yeah, I always liked Egg Monsters from Mars. You're in the kitchen. and there's something drastically wrong happening there. So yeah,
Egg Monsters from Mars. Wow, yeah, there's just so many. There's so many covers. The Shrunken Head cover is awesome too. I always remembered that one with like the green border on it. I personally own that. I still have that one too. I still have that one somewhere. That's another one that I read so much that like the top of the corners are all bent and like my book is like, yeah, my Shrunken Head book is like shrinking. It's like it's yeah, it's like it's had its wear and tear through the years.
it's funny when I'm out at conventions and people bring books to be signed. I signed a lot of beat up books. It's like, yeah, this is my original. I have others, but this is the one I remember the most. And obviously, it's been opened and closed hundreds of times, and the cover's barely on. But yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and another big thing about that is that like uh, when these Goosebumps books were coming out and they were in my life, there was no iPads, there was no iPhones, there was no none of that stuff. So like me growing up crossing like the borders from Mexicali to because I live on a border town, grew up, so I'd be in Mexico and the U.S. back and forth as a child. And when you'd cross back from Mexico to the U.S., we'd be stuck in line for like 4 hours sometimes because the line would be so long. And so, I either had Goosebump books that I was reading or these little Archie double digests. And like, so literature and reading was always a thing for me. And like, those were like my jams. And like, so, I mean, the wear and tear that I put into these things, like you know what I mean? They definitely suffered, and me drawing on them and taking notes. Like, it's like I knew I was going to be writing later in my life before I even did it. It's like I was already kind of like putting myself through studies. And so yeah, I always loved it. Everything that you've all done, it's amazing.
I mean, that's a real valid point. Um, in the 90s, paperbacks were a cornerstone of entertainment, just due to the reasons you just said. Video games were garbage at that point. There was only three channels that were worth anything on the TV. There was no cable. There was no internet. There was, movies were still, just, the special effects were just getting going. So paperback books were a major cornerstone of entertainment, and people read an incredible amount of them. That's why that's why it was a great market to be part of as an illustrator, because they put out hundreds and hundreds of titles every month, and people just gobbled them up.
There was a certain point in my life where I lived with my grandparents, and I would just cross the street from school, and they basically would just raise me. I just lived with them in their little apartment, and they didn't have like television and stuff, like channels, like they didn't pay for channels and stuff. So they had these little antennas, and like you would like tweak them and stuff, and like try to find whatever you can get. And the only channel that was in English was Fox. We had Fox, and on Fox, just by chance, they had the Goosebumps show. Illegally or bootleg, get the satellite to work and show me a staticky Goosebumps show.
Put a couple of aluminum foil
Yeah,
panels on the end and get a
yeah.
little signal. Oh yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah, like it's, and I would just make it work, and then I would watch the Goosebumps, show, dun 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 dun, that theme song and like the whole thing, and like that was like my jam, and like I just loved it, and a lot of it they had to take heat off of like what you drew on a lot of them. So it was pretty cool. Like you impacted in a lot more ways than you probably would have imagined when you first drew the book covers.
Oh, absolutely. There was no concept, or no one talked about it early on that, someday these covers may become any live action anything. So no, none of it was given consideration. I had nothing directly to do with the television show, but I did like tuning it in just for the same reason you were just talking about, to go, all right, well, how much of my stuff are they using, and how much are they, taking artistic license? And I think more than anything, the budget of the show dictated what they could do and what they couldn't do. So, I had character, the haunted mask. that's a little easier to pull off. It's a mask,
Yeah.
and it's a regular girl. But I start making some other crazy things, and I know they bailed out real quick, real fast, because there was no budget to be building 3D monsters, and no such thing as CGI. So yeah, no, I liked it more when they were forced to do something 100% different than what I did. That appealed to me more than seeing, a version, a similar or slightly different version. I liked when I turned it on and I went, oh yeah, that's another way to go with this. That's pretty cool.
A Girl Who Cried Monster, that episode. Wow, I remember seeing that as a kid, where the librarian with the, and that, I really thought that one was pretty like on point with your cover. I was like, oh, this is totally like the book,
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that one was a great example of like, I still, that episode still resonates with me. Yeah, and when you finally see his yeah, for those who haven't seen it, you should Google it, look it up.
It's a lot of fun to watch now. I think they're still running them on Netflix, but
Yeah.
to go back now and watch them, not only do you get a chance to revisit the stories, but you also get a chance to go revisit, the way people dressed, and you get that 100% feel for the 90s, and also get a feel for, like it was a tight budget on those shows, so they, what they needed to do to get the show in the can. So I'm more entertained now than I was back then.
You mentioned the haunted mask earlier. You actually have a really cool backstory that I've seen online about someone who was your muse for the haunted mask.
So whenever when there was a human in my paintings, whether it was a Goosebumps book or otherwise, I would always get someone to pose for me, because I could draw a figure, but if I have no reference, they have a tendency to be a little more cartoonish. So when I get photographic reference, then all those subtleties and subtle lighting and features are all right there that I can look at and really bring into the painting. So the more realistic those people are in my painting, the more you're going to buy into the craziness that's going to be going on around that person. So yeah, my niece Jessie, she's my goddaughter, so she's not blood, but she's my daughter, and so we brought her over the house, and I got my camera out, and I think back then, I'm pretty sure, I know I did it a lot. I used to even shoot with the Polaroid camera, where the film would peel out of the front of the camera, and I asked her if she wanted to be on a Goosebumps cover, and she was thrilled. She told all her friends that she was going to be on a Goosebumps book, and so I brought her over to the house, and I sat her down and told her what we were going to do, and then I had a mask. It wasn't the same mask that you see in the painting, but I needed something so I could see her hands holding it, and I said, okay, now put this in front of your face, and at that point, she realized no one was ever going to recognize her on the Goosebumps cover, and the excitement of being on a Goosebumps cover kind of went away really quick, and she was a little annoyed with me, but luckily it became one of the biggest biggest sellers in the Goosebumps series. I sent her a whole bunch of books, and she gave them out to her friends so that she could prove that at least that was the top of her head on that Goosebumps cover. And what's even more interesting now is Jessie is a doctor, and she has 5 kids of her own, and it's it's funny to go back and remember that little kid, when she was first on the book cover. So we laugh about it a lot, and she still likes telling her friends that she was on a Goosebumps cover.
Ordinary questions with extraordinary individuals. I love when the audience just gets to like relate on a lot of things. So let's start with the first simple question. Tim, what is your favorite color?
I guess I got to go with red.
What is your favorite artist or band of all time, like music?
I think I got to stick with Pink Floyd.
Nice. I'm also a Pink Floyd fan. What is your favorite movie of all time?
Um, I'm going to go back to an old one that had a big influence on me when I was in high school. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Oh, nice. What is your favorite snack or dessert of all time?
I'm a salt guy more than a sweet guy. So classic the nice kettle chips that you can get now.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, there's a restaurant by us that makes homemade potato chips.
Oh,
Anytime
nice.
you can get homemade potato chips, I'm on board.
What is one place you have not traveled to yet that you still want to visit?
There's a lot of places. I've been lucky enough to travel pretty extensively around the United States, but I haven't done much outside the country. If we're just going to pick one place, I'll go as far away as I can and say Australia.
What is your favorite franchise or nostalgic property of all time?
I'm just going to pull one out of, just because me and my dad used to sit there and watch it. There was a show called Combat on,
Okay.
that used to show up black and white. And yeah, and yeah, I just, the, the old time shows, especially the black and white stuff, that's
Yeah.
still, that I will stop every time when I'm passing by.
If you could offer one last bit of advice to anyone out there trying to pursue their passions, what would it be?
Because I started my career uh, uh, so many years ago that there's not any particular steps that I took that would apply directly to anybody today. But one thing I like to say is that no matter what your pursuit is, it's a numbers game, and in order to get better at whatever you do, it's the amount of time that you put in. Now, when I talk to most people who aren't in school, when you're in school, they force you to finish projects and get stuff done. But once you leave that environment and you're your own boss and you're the one making the time for this stuff, you have to you have to carve out some specific time for your creativity. You should look at it the same way you look at eating healthy or going to the gym or taking care of your family. You will know that you have to carve out specific time. It doesn't have to be a ton at the beginning, but even if it's as simple as 1 hour a week, okay, it's Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, and from 8 to 9 everything goes off and you sit there and you draw. If you get that 1 hour under your belt, then you expand it a little bit, but make it something that's ritualistic, and it's not negotiable. You can't go, oh, I'll do that tomorrow night. And if you can make your passion an integral part of your everyday environment, and that's the goal, is to make it something that you do every day. And once you're doing it every day, you're getting those hours, those reps, and what's going to happen is you're really going to start to see the improvement. And once you get the improvement, then you get excited and you want to do it more, and that's how you kind of build momentum. So really, just that simple act of carving out specific time and sticking to it no matter what. And that's why I'm saying start out easy. Don't say, oh, I'm putting in 14 hours this week, knowing full well you don't have 14 hours to designate, but designate some specific time. And that doesn't always have to mean, if you're a writer, that doesn't mean that you have to physically be writing. You can be studying something, you can be taking something apart, you can be taking simple notes, but it has to be inside that environment. Searching the internet does not count, but you have to be, just designate the time and getting your head into getting into it on a regular basis.
That is amazing advice, Tim. For reals. I know we're going to have listeners who are who genuinely want to be artists as well. Do you have like that's what you just said right now is so important to follow in terms of like work ethic and motivation and staying focused and getting things done. For anyone who, let's say, has never really done art or felt like they were really like great at it, but they want to do it, is there some kind of advice you would give? Like, how can they start? Where should they start? Let's say they're just cold blank from scratch and they just want to just start. It's going to, they got to put their 10,000 hours of work in before they become a professional, but they want to get started. What would you recommend? Books, or like, cause I know there's like how to draw books and stuff like that, or taking classes, or like from your experience, and also because you have a past as well as an instructor. What do you recommend for someone like that starting out?
Right now is actually a great time. Not meaning that Wednesday night. I mean, this is a good period of time to be alive. There's so much information that's so readily available, and there's so many different ways to pursue your art. So what you have to do first is kind of find what appeals to you. Don't pick something that you go, oh, I'm going to do that because I see somebody's making money at it, doing it that way. That's not the way you want to pursue this thing. Do something that you really like to do. And, the tools on an iPad now are just, they're mind blowing and they're so good. The Wacom tablet that's attached to this computer right here is unbelievable. If you don't want to go in the digital world, pencils and pens and art supplies are just so readily available through Amazon and every other place. Just pick what you want to do and start out small, start out easy. I know I just said iPads and, they're great, but don't go out and spend a ton of money on an iPad if you're not really sure. Just find out what you like to do and enjoy doing it, because that's something that once your art, your form of art becomes your career, you give up a little of that fun part because it's something that you have to do every day. I'm sure Derek Jeter, once it became October and the Yankees were no longer in the playoffs, he was sick of baseball. He could have cared less, and he would have rather done anything else but play ball. And there's a little of that goes on in my career. So it's just find some part of that, that you like and that you feel like doing. And when you do sit down in that carved out time, that you walk away feeling better because it was fun to do. And, I hope it's challenging. It shouldn't always be easy. There's a big difference between fun and easy. And you should always challenge yourself, and you'll always feel better when you do something that's a little bit challenging, and you'll be way more satisfied. So, just find the part of you that, find out the way that you like to work first is more important than how you're going to use it going forward.
Is there anything that you would like to plug?
Yeah,
Anything you got coming up?
JacobusStudios.com. You can stop by. There's prints that are on sale there. Anybody that's in the metropolitan area, the New York Comic Convention is coming up in exactly a month. And so I'll be there for 4 days, and that's a huge event. I've attended it, but I've never been part of it. And this will be the first time for me, so I'm excited about that. And no, that's about it.
I really appreciate you being on the show. This is it's actually a dream for me come true, getting the chance to do this interview and talk to you, because I like we said earlier, it's funny, but I'm literally like, when you're drawing and painting these covers for Goosebumps, I was literally the demographic that you were aiming for. So it's kind of cool to see it reciprocate and go back, and I really truly appreciate it. And like, as a writer now in the industry myself, it goes to show that like the influence And for me too, and I think of this the way that I think you, some of the work that I am working on now in the future, it's just a cycle. It could inspire somebody else. So the way you inspired me, now I inspire someone else, and it's this cycle, and it's really beautiful. Really, it's really a beautiful thing. You know, it's like and then to get
It's one
yeah.
of the coolest things about this. Yeah, I never, especially you miss it. So I was, I was in my early 30s when the Goosebumps started, and I knew I was creating art for, people, that were your age at the time, around 10 years old, and we weren't contemporaries at that time. So I didn't think of, oh, I'm going to inspire these kids. I was just hoping I entertained you for 10 minutes and, got you to pick the book up. And, now here we are 30 years later. You still remember it fondly. And it's so cool to hear from guys like you who have taken whatever spark that you got back then and you've continued to be creative. And I didn't expect that at all early on in my career. And now it's definitely one of the cooler parts about what I do when I hear stories like this.
Yeah, well, Tim, I mean, I'll kind of send off with saying this, like you and RL and the Goosebumps books that you put out. For me, you made the library fun. You made it cool, and you made it something that I look forward to going to, and other kids my age group that they look forward to. I mean, those things you couldn't find. We would be like anticipating for someone to turn their freaking book back in so that we could check it out, So like, and when that came, it's like we waited for the book fairs to where like we finally had a shot at like trying to buy what the newest number that came out was, regardless of what the title of the cover was. We knew we were gonna want it. So yeah, it's so cool to get to talk to you after all these years and the impact you've had. So thank you so much, Tim. And I just want to let you know I appreciate you and everyone listening. Hope this episode inspired you. And to me, you're a legend, Tim. It's an honor having you here. And everyone,
thank you, Ruben.
Please give Tim a follow. Check him out. You can get some prints, some merchandise. Check out his official website. If you're going to New York Comic Con, I believe it's at the Javits Center. It is an absolutely massive show. If you're in that area, go by and support Tim as well. You're not going to regret it. It's going to be awesome. And that's it, everybody. Thank you for listening to another episode of Passions Personified. And again, Tim, thank you so much.
All right, you take care, Ruben.